You're listening to the Monocle Daily, first broadcast on the 6th of February 2026 on Monocle Radio.
Representatives from dozens of mineral-rich nations gather to find out what America wants from them, the surprisingly rich cinematic heritage of winter sports, and dispatches from Monocle's teams at the World Government Summit in Dubai and the Winter Olympics in Milan. I'm Andrew Muller. The Monocle Daily starts now. Hello and welcome to the Monocle Daily, coming to you from our studios here at Midori House in London. I'm Andrew Muller. It is our in-house Friday edition. My guests H.J. Mai, Inzamam Rashid, Chris Cermak and Lily Austin will discuss the day's big stories, and we'll have our weekly wrap-up of what we've learned. Stay tuned, all that and more coming up right here on the Monocle Daily. This is the Monocle Daily. I'm Andrew Muller. We start in Washington, D.C. US President Donald Trump has made little secret of the subtext of his recent actual or threatened interventions in jurisdictions including Venezuela, Iran and Greenland. In a probably not entirely unrelated development, representatives from more than 50 countries have descended on Washington, D.C. this week for what is being billed as the Critical Minerals Ministerial, a summit intended to build alliances between suppliers and customers with a side order of stopping China from hoovering up the entire business. Well, I'm joined first of all from Washington, D.C. by H.J. Mai, journalist and Monocle regular. H.J., give us some sense of how big a thing this has been. Obviously, D.C. is accustomed to hosting international gatherings of all sorts. Where does this one rank?
It's hard to say because the news here shift almost like on a daily, maybe hourly basis. So it was big news for a day, I would say. People focused on it. And, since then, the news cycle has moved on. But for that day and, people who are in that space, in that industry of critical minerals, for them, it was a big deal. And as you mentioned, more than 50 countries showed up. It was an interesting list. You mentioned Greenland. I think, it was interesting that Greenland and representatives of Denmark were not there. So that was definitely something that was of interest. But I would say, for 24 hours, it was big news.
But of the countries that did come, did you get the sense that they were there because they wanted to be part of whatever it is the United States is planning with critical minerals, or because they sort of felt like they had to be there?
I think it's a mixture of both. I mean, I think, a lot of governments or a lot of countries have realized that this huge dependency on China for the critical minerals, rare earths and others is a challenge, is not good for their own countries. So they look to the US for some guidance. But as you know, I mean, the U.S. under this administration, is currently, trying to, a lot of things go its own way. So I think it's a mixture of, we want to decrease our dependency on China, but at the same time, there's no other country who can maybe build such an alliance than the U.S. And so they're kind of forced to be there as well. So it was like a mixture of, and you saw it with the countries who were there and also with the statements that, some countries delivered afterward. It's like, we realize that this is a big issue. We have to do something about it. And, at the moment, if we don't want to work with China on this, then the U.S. is the only other option.
I mean, that does sound a bit like a realization that could have been an email. Has there been any actual concrete outcome from this?
Nothing concrete so far. I mean, the U.S., as you're well aware of, have signed several critical minerals agreements with different countries over the past year. So on Wednesday, when the summit happened here in D.C., they signed an additional 10 those agreements with countries like, Argentina and others. But this framework that was talked about ahead of time, that they would build this trading bloc where there would be no tariffs, and they try to set a price floor so it is actually economic and viable, to mine and process those minerals. That has not happened. That's still an ongoing discussion with those countries.
Well, the convener of this was, of course, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio. What has he had to say about it?
I mean, he made clear, that the dependence on, as he called it, one country is not good. It was interesting to hear that he actually did not mention China by name, and I think we have a clip that we can listen to where he explained, why it's important that the U.S. Is convening this alliance, and the U.S. can't go alone to really break that stranglehold that China has on this industry.
No country in the world has every critical mineral that's valuable. And so it will rely on international cooperation. That right now, you have 90-something% of some of these elements controlled by one nation in one place. And that's just not healthy for the global economy, and it's certainly not healthy for security and stability.
As you said there, Marco Rubio naming China without naming China. Is this something that the United States seems to be focusing on more in its, well, multifaceted rivalry with China?
I think so, and I think so. It's also a realization that, at this current state where we are, that the U.S. is still dependent on China. The U.S. needs cooperation, and we've seen it last year. During the trade war between the U.S. and China, that China is using critical minerals and an export embargo, to put some pressure on the U.S. and have some leverage. So I think by not naming it, I guess the administration is trying to make sure that China does not see this convenience of alliance as an attack. But it was very clear, why this summit happened and who the target is, and that is China and its stranglehold again on this industry.
And just finally, in a related development, what do we know about this new Project Vault thing that President Trump has announced?
Yeah, I think everybody realized that this dependency is not good, and so the U.S. looked at its stockpile of critical minerals and realized there isn't really one. So earlier this week, the president announced this $12 billion investment in stockpiling critical minerals. I think $2 billion of that 12 will come from the private sector, and then the rest will be from, the U.S. Export-Import Bank, which is like a type of development bank here in the U.S., to create that stockpile. And we've also seen that the U.S. has invested directly. Direct investments has gotten, shares of companies who are in this space. And so I think this will be an ongoing progress. I think also the concern for a lot of countries going forward is this one of those projects that will fizzle out once this administration ends. People I talk to think that's not the case because it's such a critical industry and such a critical supply chain that it has to be secured. But the Project Vault is just to have a stockpile like the U.S. has when it comes to, for example, an oil stockpile or other things. They also want to finally achieve a critical mineral stockpile, which obviously the biggest component to it is that it's heavily used by the military for their precision weapons.
H.J. Mai in Washington, D.C. Thanks for joining us. You're listening to The Daily. This is The Daily on Monocle Radio. All this week in Dubai, the World Government Summit has been occurring. Monocle Radio has had a team there, among them Inzamam Rashid, Monocle's Gulf correspondent, who joins me now. Inzamam, first of all, for those listeners who may have missed our many dispatches from the summit this week, describe Monocle Radio's setup there.
It was definitely the best setup on the ground. We had the Monocle Cafe there, of course, serving the best cafe at the World Government Summit site. And then myself, our editor-in-chief, Andrew Tuck, and head of radio, Tom Edwards, were kind of inside this nice little air-conditioned cubicle outside of the Dubai sun. And we were speaking to world leaders from right across the globe. Also interesting folk from the world of business, fashion as well. AI, of course, a big part of this year's World Government Summit. So it was a very, very busy World Government Summit for Monocle.
We are going to be queuing up one of those interviews with a world leader shortly. But other than this one, who were among your personal highlights of the week?
Look, speaking to the Prime Minister of Georgia had to be a highlight. This is a man whose country has got a lot of issues. He himself has got a lot of issues right now. Of course, accusations of election rigging and protests in Georgia following those elections, their position on Russia. We put that to him as well. And of course, speaking to him about Georgia's desire to be part of the EU Commission. And also, I actually asked him at the end of the interview, of course, because it had to be the final question, otherwise he may have stormed out. I asked him a bit about his hairdo. I said to him that he's probably got one of the most noticeable hairstyles in world politics, maybe after Boris Johnson or even Donald Trump. And he actually replied saying that to him, it's crucial. He couldn't imagine himself with a different haircut. So, yeah, I guess some things aren't negotiable.
And did you get a sense of like a general tone of the conference? I mean, these events often start out saying it's all going to be about one particular theme, and then they end up being about something else entirely.
Well, look, this one was what they billed it as was the future of governments. So they were specifically looking at how governments can govern in the future, particularly around AI, artificial intelligence, how they can incorporate that into the world of politics and diplomacy and being able to govern in a country. There was also a lot of conversation around kind of urban planning, around city planning as well. But on a lot of these kind of big global summits, it's something that you don't usually see, the mix of countries that were available at the World Government Summit here in Dubai.
Finally then, Inzi, introduce, if you will, the highlight we're about to play.
Yeah, look, the Kosovan President Osmani, had joined us in the Monocle Radio studio. And I think actually to set this up, we also had a conversation with the Prime Minister of Serbia, Đuro Masut. And of course, Serbia does not recognize Kosovo as a country. And so there is still, and has been for a long time, huge tensions between the two nations. And well, what was interesting for us was, firstly, we spoke to the president of Kosovo, President Osmani, and then literally 10 minutes later, and thankfully they didn't actually cross paths, we spoke to the Prime Minister of Serbia. We could have had a diplomatic kind of relations issue on the doorstep of the Monocle studio, but thankfully about a minute or two between the two of them coming into our studio. So here we can listen to the president of Kosovo, President Osmani.
When you get to forums like this, everyone is here, and there's enormous opportunity, not just diplomatically speaking, but there's enormous economic opportunity with countries that we've never spoken before. But then we sit down and we find so much in common, so many interests in common, and this opens way to joint cooperation agreements, whether in trade or in the ICT sector, in AI, to education, tourism, and so much more. So it's a place where in an hour you can meet 4 presidents, and that's a lot. It's immense, and the results are always strikingly positive for a nation like Kosovo. So for us, it's been very, very fruitful so far. And it's always like that whenever we come to the UAE, which is a country that has always been so supportive to Kosovo. Since 1999, when we underwent genocidal war, the UAE supported us to rebuild our country from the ashes. And now they support us in the health sector and so many other sectors. So we're so grateful that we've been included in this summit, and it's an enormous opportunity to strengthen existing relations, but also create new alliances and new relations with other friends around the world.
On that kind of point of conversation, yes, business is something you talk a lot about here, but diplomacy will be one element as well. What kind of conversations are you having with your counterparts from around the world, especially on a day like today, where US-Kosovan conversations are reigniting, it seems, and taking further steps forward after what's been a pretty fraught relationship? Can you talk us through those steps?
Now, of course, the relationship that we have with the United States of America has always been existential. As you know, the U.S. led the world to come to our rescue, to save our lives, and to give us an opportunity to live in freedom, independence, and to enjoy the democracy that we have today. But Kosovo, in turn, has turned into one of the biggest success stories of U.S. foreign policy in modern history, and not just the U.S., but NATO in general, because there's been other countries that contributed, like the U.K. and many members of the European Union and like-minded democracies. But at this time, obviously, we are working very strongly with the Trump administration to see how we can expand this relationship beyond diplomacy and beyond the usual political ideas and engagements that we've had in the past. So we're very much focused right now on two main sectors. The first one is defense. We have an enormous support from the United States in the area of defense. And as you know, we are living in a very fragile continent, let alone our region, which is even more fragile in terms of security. So it's very important that we have the necessary defense capabilities.
Can I ask what kind of defense capabilities and conversations are you having with the US?
So we get a lot of support when it comes to weapons, defense weapons, that is. But at the same time, we get a lot of trainings in the United States of America to make sure that our army further develops entirely in line with NATO standards. Now, there's enormous potential to see how we in Kosovo, as a country that might be seen as small, but because of the free trade agreements, we have free access to hundreds of millions of Europeans. So today, when you invest in Kosovo, you're investing in hundreds of millions of Europeans, not just in Kosovo per se, but with the cheapest labor price and with much cheaper prices overall, with an excellent legal and financial system, and the most pro-American country on earth. So I think we fulfill all of the conditions to be seen as quite a desired destination for U.S. businesses. And so we're working on that. So the relationship is expanding. Of course, our alignment continues to lie with the Euro-Atlantic Alliance. For us, there's never been a gray zone there. There's never been a question. We're also 100% aligned with the EU foreign and security policy, whether in sanctions against Russia or other issues, because we believe that, especially in difficult moments, what you stand for and where you stand is what truly matters.
That was President Vjosa Osmani of Kosovo in conversation with Inzamam Rashid, Monocle's Gulf correspondent, at the recent World Government Summit in Dubai. You're listening to The Daily. This is The Daily on Monocle Radio. For the next 2 weeks, Monocle Radio will be broadcasting from the Winter Olympics, live from Allianz Tower in Milan. To kick proceedings off, Monocle's editorial director, Tyler Brûlé, sat down with Allianz CEO Oliver Bete to discuss sport, economic outlook and what it means for his company to be in the eyes of the world as the worldwide insurance partner of the Olympic and Paralympic Games.
But let's talk about the Olympics quickly. What does it mean for a company like Allianz? I mean, you can support many things, but you chose this.
So the Olympic movement, particularly also the Paralympic movement we talked about the last time, is something super important for us because we believe in a number of things the Olympic movement represents. The first thing is when you have chaos in the world, to find a few weeks, 2 weeks, to focus on something totally different, that's sports, where people from all over the world, athletes, about a few hundreds, are trying to do the impossible, which win against the best in the world and focus on everything else, and then there should be peace. And at this time, an interesting concept to revisit. So I hope that not some interesting politician thinks about dropping some bombs on another country, at least the next 2 weeks. Second thing is, it is enormous motivation for everyone that watches this. Over 1 billion people expected to look into that. And the third one is how we thought about it for Allianz specifically. My big surprise was not just the motivation for our customer base, but particularly our employee base. People are ecstatic about participation in the relays, the torch relays, in being a volunteer for the Olympic Games. So it's enormous positive emotional motivation in a world where we need a lot of that. And I've been very happy when we started 21, people said, is that a great idea? What are the financial returns? It has been amazing on every dimension. So thank you for asking.
I want to go to the internal side. There is this sense of rallying because people think, okay, I'm part of a company where I see my company's name with the Olympic rings.
Yes. And there's only 11 companies, as you know, that are allowed to carry the rings. And in the inner circle, we also see what we can add. We're not just providing insurance. We're helping, for example, the Bobsledding Association to create safer bobsleds, something really practical. We have even a system for that. So we can add a lot of value, and we try. We try very, very hard. But the motivation around doing something that is exceptional, pushing the boundaries every time, innovating on how you do things and how do you win. Something in Europe that we've lost a little bit, right? It's more like the competition around how can I work less, but we've talked about that.
Or no, we're going to come back to that. That was before we went on air. I was coming through Malpensa Airport, and there you were, but then there's a lot of Asian companies, a bit of US, but maybe you're the only Europeans or probably European headquartered. But
it's really funny because we don't check. We think about ourselves having a German soul, but really being global, right?
Is there an advantage in that today? Because we can talk a little bit about the economy. I think everyone knows that Germany has been dented. Everyone says Germany's coming back. It's trickling upwards. What's your take? What is Mr. Beta's take on this right now?
On Allianz? Or
no. I think let's Allianz first, but then I think we can talk Brand Deutschland.
So we have been very fortunate. Very fortunate. I cannot talk about the financial results, but the forecasts from the market are very good. And we see something that gives me hope every day, which is the trust that customers and our people have in the company. It's an all-time high. So you may call that a qualitative aspect of things, but it translates itself over time. So we have a lot of upside in terms of customer retention and cross-selling as we all use them. But the reality is the trust of customers in our company and our brand has never been higher in our 136-year history. By the way, we had birthday yesterday, 5th of February was our birthday. Thank you. And in terms of Germany, the really good companies in Germany are doing really well. Think about Siemens, they're really doing well. And there's many, many others that are leaders in the segment. So that is a little bit overshadowed by problems that we have in sectors that have not invested properly in the future or were mismanaged by European regulation. So I have to say I'm long Germany always. That's not because I have a German passport, because like every democracy that is filthy rich, we only move if we really have a problem. Now, and the problems are coming. So we have more than 3 million unemployed back. We still have a debate on working less than rather than more, even though we know we cannot afford the healthcare and the social systems we have. Remember, Europe has 5% of the global population, but 50% of the social spending is just unaffordable. The problem is politicians do not want to address this because they said we get booted out of office. People do not want to be told to work more, right? And they said, well, someone has to do it.
Also, someone has to show them the vision of where they end up if they don't.
Yes. And also give them a better picture. One is the catastrophic outcome, right? And then you say, what is it bad? You're not growing like Italy for 30 years, right? Let's remind ourselves, the BIP in Italy hasn't grown since 1994, right? So it's a real issue. But it feels good, if you have the best food in the world, the most beautiful water, super people, history, people get along, but it comes with huge issues. And we want to make sure that we learn from that and we do better.
That was Allianz CEO Oliver Beta speaking to Monocle's editorial director Tyler Brûlé. You'll hear more from the Winter Olympics across all our shows as the Games continue, and a special new programme, Monocle in Milan, begins on Monday at 10 a.m. Milan time on Monocle Radio. This is The Daily on Monocle Radio, and sticking with the subject of the Winter Olympics, the opening ceremony of which is just minutes away, it occurred to us that there is a rich seam of cinema attached to winter sports. And to elaborate upon this, I'm joined by Monocle Radio senior news editor Chris Cermak and Lily Austin, co-producer of The Foreign Desk and Monocle Radio's resident cineast. Hello to you both. Lily, first of all, as Monocle Radio's resident cineast, where would you rank winter sports films as a genre on your list of favourite sorts of movie?
I feel like that's a leading question because I already alluded before we came on air to the fact that...
Absolutely a leading question.
You know what? Initially, when Chris suggested this subject to me, I did wonder if I could come up with anything. But then immediately things came to mind, such as Cool Runnings, if we're going to just dive right in. So actually, I mean, there are many great films. I don't know where it ranks in my list, but there's a lot to talk about.
Chris, do you have a particular favourite winter sports film?
I mean, I am going to go with Cool Runnings since it was brought up. I would say that is my favorite of all time. I am a fan of the genre, so I'm going to throw that out there. In contrast, I've always loved the sort of underdog stories. I do like my sports movies in general. I'm a baseball fan. There's lots of good baseball movies. But in the Winter Olympics, we're going to talk about a few. I love hockey movies. But yes, Cool Runnings has always been at the top of that list as an Olympic underdog story. But also it's just one of those that I grew up with. It was in my time. I mean, as like a little side note, I just remember the first, as it happens, tennis tournament, this is a very bit of a side note, that I ever won, or came in second, sorry, rather runner-up, when I was about 13, I could select a group of prizes on the table, and the prize that I chose from my local club was a VHS tape of Cool Runnings rather than anything else, because I was so excited to own that film. I wore that tape out.
Well, to rev us up, we do have a clip from what I'm sure is the young Chris Cermak's original VHS tape of Cool Runnings, which he still wears around his neck on a chain as a sort of amulet, I like to think.
Feel the rhythm! Feel the rhyme! Get on up! It's bobsled time! Cool Runnings!
A very short clip there from Cool Runnings about the unlikely... ascent seems the wrong word. But the unlikely journey to the Winter Games of the Jamaican bobsled team. But yes, Chris, you mention the underdog story. We do, of course, I think, have to talk about I thought a very good film about Eddie Edwards, or better known as Eddie the Eagle. There was a 2016 film of that name. Eddie the Eagle was, of course, the British ski jumper who qualified for the Olympic Games in 1988 by basically noticing that nobody else in Britain could be bothered with the ski jump. And despite the fact that he had roughly the same capacity for unassisted flight to St. Paul's Cathedral, did actually go to the Olympic Games.
He did go to the Olympic Games.
Spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert. He didn't quite make it. But nonetheless, a heartwarming story. A great movie as well about Eddie the Eagle. And I have to say, also on a personal note, interesting that in Germany, everybody knows Eddie the Eagle. When I used to live there, people would bring up, to any fellow Brit you'd meet, Eddie the Eagle, yes, we love him. So he's this famous character in alpine sports.
I could hazard to guess as to why, in fact, I could hazard two guesses as to why Germans are drawn to English characters who are no good at anything and keep coming last. Lily, other than Cool Runnings, do you have any particular favourites?
Well, when I was thinking about winter sports, what came to mind was the adjacent winter sport film, or at least using winter sports as a jumping off point to talk about other things. Case in point, The Spy Who Loved Me, one of the most beloved Bond films.
Good spot, actually. The opening sequence.
Thank you, exactly. Mm-hmm. Of all the Bond opening sequence, and there have been a lot of iconic ones, this really has always stuck in my mind. We see Bond in the Alps, in the Austrian Alps, in a beautiful wood cabin with a beautiful blonde woman, and then he receives a message on a sort of ticker tape. It's almost like a fax machine on his watch. He gets a little message through. That
1970s idea of what the future would look like. We will all have a fax machine on our wrist and a VHS tape around our necks.
Yes, the idea of it being a screen, they couldn't make that jump, but a piece of ticker tape coming through. Anyway, he gets summoned, so he goes off. There's this brilliant line where the woman says, "But James, I need you." And he replies, "So does England," and leaves. And then what happens is he's kind of accosted by some Soviet spies on the slopes.
Well, that'll happen.
So they get into a sort of, they make chase, and he shoots them as he's going down the slope. There's this brilliant jump over the edge of a kind of avalanche, and he ejects a parachute which has the Union Jack on it. So maybe something to take note for this Winter Olympics for the skiers.
Chris, you mentioned the hockey movie earlier and the idea of the underdog movie earlier. And of course, one of the great actual real life underdog stories of all time ever did occur on an Olympic hockey rink.
Absolutely did. Just before that, can I mention for any Bond fans that there's a museum atop of Sölden in Austria called 007 Elements, and this was based on after they did another movie with, in this case, Daniel Craig skiing down a mountain. They filmed that in Sölden. That was Spectre. So that is a museum that is worth a visit if you're ever skiing in Sölden. But yes, to the hockey, and yes, the 1980 Olympics is known as the Miracle on Ice. It was the Olympics where the American men's hockey team, a bunch of amateur college hockey players, managed to dethrone the powerful Soviet team. And so this was a massive story, of course, at the time, in the middle of the Cold War as well. And then they made a movie of it, another Disney movie. It's maybe not quite at the level of Cool Runnings for me personally, but it is a very heartwarming tale. Describes what they went through, how the coach, Herb Brooks, in this case, managed to sort of rally this team together in that very patriotic way, show them what it means to represent your country, a whole bunch of college kids, and then go on to defeat the Soviet Union.
Well, we do have a clip from that as well. This is the obligatory, inevitable, rousing locker room pep talk.
You were born to be hockey players. Every one of you. Their time is done. This is your time. Now go out there and take it.
How did they get the string quartet into the dressing room?
I could have picked a bit before the string quartet came in, but we didn't have enough time. So all of a sudden, the string quartet arrives just about like 3/4 of the way through his speech.
I mean, at this point, I would like to nominate my own winter sports movie, which is a hockey-related one, if not an Olympic one. It is Slapshot, I think the much undervalued 1977 comedy starring Paul Newman, of all people. He must have had rent due or something. But as the sort of aging star of a struggling small-town hockey team which revives its fortunes by committing to a creed of just absolute unfettered mayhem.
Can I just throw in at that point, because in doing research on that, going down a rabbit hole and realizing that his longtime sort of compatriot in film, Robert Redford, also did a winter sports movie that I have not yet seen but now want to see, called Downhill Racer from back in 1969. Robert Redford and Gene Hackman, a downhill racer.
Everybody's rent needed paying. Lily, you have also highlighted at least one which deals, I guess, with what we might think of as the darker side of sport, or at least the ambition that goes along with sport.
Yes, I mean, I think this is also a sort of underdog story too. But I think for a lot of our listeners, they perhaps might think of I, Tonya as an obvious choice for winter sports as a film, because that came out in 2017. There was a lot of Oscar and awards buzz around this film. And this looks at the story of the 1994 figure skating Olympics, where shortly before the Olympics, Nancy Kerrigan, who was one of the US competitors, was assaulted, and with the intent of breaking her leg so that she wouldn't be able to compete. And it was quickly discovered that Tonya Harding, one of her competitors, was associated. Her ex-husband had arranged it, which sounds very dark and also a completely mad story. And I, Tonya takes a kind of mockumentary approach to telling the story and looking at the people and the kind of backdrop to Tonya Harding's life, which was very difficult. And it's a really well-made film, but I wanted to throw in another option for those of us who are interested in this story, because prior to that film, there was a brilliant documentary called The Price of Gold, which tells the same story. But in this, Tonya Harding is interviewed, and it has a very different tone and is much more sympathetic, I would say. But I don't think, unreasonably, I don't think it's biased. But it's a really engaging, interesting documentary that was made by ESPN and kind of made me aware of the Tonya Harding story even before I, Tonya came out. So I'd recommend doing a double viewing of the two to kind of compare.
Just going to say, for what it's worth, if we're on documentaries, the same thing with Miracle. If you don't want to see the soppy Disney version, there is currently a Netflix documentary out called Miracle, The Boys of 80.
I do want to play just a clip from I, Tonya, which we do have.
America, they want someone to love, but they want someone to hate. I mean, come on. What kind of friggin' person bashes in their friend's knee? Who would do that to a friend?
I have seen I, Tonya, and I have also seen The Price of Gold, Lily, the documentary that you mentioned. Both of them are excellent, but the reason I liked I, Tonya very much was it did a really good job, I think, of illustrating more broadly the momentum that a stupid idea can gather. And
yes.
Because you get the sense from that and from the documentary that all the people who participated in the conspiracy to injure Nancy Kerrigan seemed kind of surprised that any of it had actually happened. It was just like one of those really dumb ideas that somebody has after a couple of drinks and then should never speak of again, and yet...
Yes, absolutely. And not one of them had the full story. I don't think it was a coherent plan at all. It was sort of pieced together, and it's extraordinary that they even managed to get that far, honestly. But it's also very perceptive. I think both perceptively look at how the idea of the perceptions around what sport should be and the kind of people that should perform, and especially in something like figure skating. I don't know if it's still the case, but certainly it seems that at that time there was a perceived look and style, and Tonya Harding offered something very different, and it's an interesting look at that too.
Just very finally and very quickly, Chris, to the Olympics themselves, and just as Lily is our resident cineast, I just like saying that word, you, I guess, on account of your upbringing, are our resident winter sports person. I'm looking forward to this. I will be in Milan for the second week of Monocle in Milan. But is there a particular sport that you, as somebody who has actually been upright on skis, looks forward to most at the Winter Olympics?
Well, I mean, as somebody who is upright on skis, I do mostly look forward to the skiing. So I am going to put that out there. As an Austrian, I kind of have to look very excitedly forward to the alpine skiing, the downhill in particular. Incidentally, one final movie recommendation.
Go on.
Klammer, about Franz Klammer, probably the most famous Austrian skier. There is an Austrian biopic about him if you really want to go into the weeds. But yes, the alpine skiing, I love the ski jumping as well, and there's been some fun controversy. People can read about that recently.
That's a whole other thing.
That's a whole other thing, but adds an element to the ski jumping this year. So yeah, the alpine sports, I gotta say, I do love the classics. In that sense, and that's obviously where Austria does very well as well. And, you know, I'm Austrian-American, but this is where Austria shines, so I don't care what the Americans do.
Chris Cermak and Lily Austin, thank you both for joining us. This is The Daily with me, Andrew Muller. Finally, on today's show, our weekly attempt to figure out how much the wiser we are for having put up with another 7 days of this. We learned this week of an intriguing new angle to American exceptionalism, that belief which holds that the United States operates according to different precepts and conventions to those which constrain other, perchance lesser, nations.
I can't wait to see where this goes.
Okay. Tell me more.
Let's
see where this goes.
Strap yourselves in. We learned via the latest dump of documents pertaining to the unlamented human trafficker Jeffrey Epstein that while evidence of association with the dead creep is a career-destroying and or reputation-wrecking scandal in the United Kingdom,
we are hearing in the last few minutes there has been a statement issued by the Metropolitan Police. Remember, we've been reporting that the Met is set to launch a criminal investigation into Lord Mandelson.
Norway.
And from the Norwegian press, then, a lot of focus on the Crown Princess's connection to the convicted pedophile financier.
Yeah, that's right. As this Norwegian paper here explains, she is mentioned some 1,000 times in those latest files released.
Slovakia.
On Saturday, top Slovakian politician and former Minister of Foreign Affairs Miroslav Lajčák resigned from his post. In the 3.5 million Epstein files released on Friday, the name Lajčák reportedly appears 346 times.
And Sweden.
Förenta Nationerna-toppen Joanna Rubinstein lämnar sitt uppdrag, besökte Epstein.
Take our word for it. In the United States, having maintained cordial association with a convicted sex offender is just no big deal. Not really a thing. Come on, who among us has not cheerfully socialized or corresponded with someone who has literally been imprisoned for procuring a child for prostitution? And we learned this from no less authorities than US Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche.
As you know, it is not a crime to party with Mr. Epstein.
And indeed from one of Blanche's former clients, for whom Blanche famously failed to win acquittal that time on 34 counts of fraud.
I think it's really time for the country to get onto something else.
From whom we further learned that it's just plain bad manners to even bring it up.
What would you say to the survivors who feel
You are the worst reporter. No wonder CNN has no ratings because of people like you. You know, she's a young woman. I don't think I've ever seen you smile.
But we learned, in fairness, that the president may have been preoccupied rearranging all the fake golf trophies on the Oval Office mantelpiece to accommodate not only the Nobel Peace Prize he believes himself due, but an Oscar. For we learned that this...
Together with like-minded leaders, we have a voice.
That, being Melania, feature-length homage to the First Lady of the United States, might not actually be the absolutely unendurable load of old bollocks the unconvinced moviegoer may well be anticipating, but potentially the greatest film ever made, like maybe even better than The Birth of a Nation or Triumph of the Will. We learned this from no less a cineast than Kayleigh McEnany, former White House press secretary turned Fox News ornament, or more specifically from Kayleigh McEnany's mum, whose completely believable testimony her daughter was delighted to share with the nation.
My mom went to this weekend in Florida. She said not only was the theater packed, it was, standing room only if you could try to sneak in the back of the theater. People were cheering through it. They were excited. It was interactive. People interplaying with the film. She said it was just electric.
And everybody on the bus clapped, etc. So we learned that Florida cinemas have standing sections. Actually, we learned that Florida has cinemas and electricity. But we learned that Mrs. McEnany was not alone in her enthusiasm. We learned that Donald Trump himself boasted that he had seen Melania for the second time. Didn't think they were that close. But
daily news, daily blues. Pick up a copy anytime you choose.
We learned that the $75 million spent on this flagrant bribe important documentary by Amazon may have reduced its CEO Jeff Bezos to his last several yachts, as we learned that cuts would need to be made at one of his other enterprises.
Our breaking news desk is busy this morning. We have just learned that the Washington Post is laying off its entire sports department and most of its overseas journalists.
We learned that aside from shuttering the sports section in what is, of course, a very quiet time of a very quiet year with only the Super Bowl, the Winter Olympics, March Madness, Major League Baseball, spring training and a World Cup coming up, other sensible economies include closing the Post's bureaus in Kyiv and Jerusalem, two legendarily uneventful beats where even the most resourceful reporters struggle to pad out column inches. Such is the paucity of noteworthy events in those vicinities. But we learned even that, or indeed any of the above, wasn't going to be the stupidest thing that happened this month.
It looks like the Patriots and Seahawks won't be the only competition during the Super Bowl this Sunday. The group founded by late conservative activist Charlie Kirk, Turning Point USA, said they plan to put on an alternative event called the All-American Halftime Show.
We learned that conservatives appalled by the choice of halftime entertainment at this coming Sunday's Super Bowl, and who knows what objection they might have to Puerto Rico's own Spanish-language rapper Bad Bunny, just a total mystery, had decided to stage an alternative, the All-American Halftime Show, consecrated to the values of, quote from the poster, faith, family and freedom, and featuring, among others, the irreproachably wholesome Kid Rock.
Young ladies, I like them underage. See, some say that's statutory, but I say it's mandatory.
A bold choice given some of the week's other disclosures. The mallet, if you would. And that is all for this edition of the Monocle Daily. Thanks to our panellists today, H.J. Mai, Inzamam Rashid, Chris Cermak and Lily Austin. The show was produced by Angelica Jobson and researched by Annalise Maynard. Our sound engineer was Mariella Bevan. I'm Andrew Muller here in London. The Daily is back at the same time on Monday. Thanks for listening and have a great weekend.